My name is Ziad Hamwi. I am the National President for Borderless Alliance in Ghana, and that is a regional trade advocacy group that promotes the free movement of goods and people across West Africa, and working closely with other initiatives and agreements such as the AfCFTA for Africa.
All right, so working for free movement across the region. Here is the case where we talk about ECOWAS, but you travel across Africa by road and realize that the free movement that we keep preaching is far within our reach. What do you think are the regulators not working? What is the implementation lacking that is not allowing Africa to access free movement? Because in a recent interview, the Africa's richest man, currently he's second, Aliko Dangote, had asserted that he had to apply for visas to be able to travel across Africa as an African richest man who is doing business across Africa. And this seems to be far-fetched for the African dream. What is lacking?
I mean, let me start by a quick background. We all know that long before the colonials came in and drew the boundaries across Africa, Africans used to travel and roam the continent with their ware and move around and have economic ties all across countries. So fast forward to today, and it is very interesting the dynamics between the two, let's call them sister agreements. The first one is the African Union's Free Movement Protocol, which aims to liberalize the movement of people across Africa. And the second one is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which looks at removing the barriers to regional trade and boosting intra-African trade. As it stands today, AfCFTA has 48 signatories, with Liberia being the latest member to join few weeks ago. In comparison, the FMP has 4 counter-signatories. And so I believe that the reason we have this huge difference with the implementation or the ratification has to do with the lack of adequate consultations with eventually the policy users, which are the people and the populace of Africa. And it shows that people are actually more wary of people moving freely across the continent than they are about traders moving to trade across the continent, even though we know that the barriers seem to be similar for both. Because when you are caught at the border, you said you travel a lot.
Exactly.
When you're caught at the border, nobody asks you whether you're a minister or an agent or a person.
Nobody cares.
No, they don't care. They just count the numbers. They say one person, this much. There are many anecdotes that abound about unpaid, unreceipted, illegal, illicit payments or facilitation, contributions, or whatever they call them, that will prevent people who have genuine documentation from crossing the borders as freely as they should. And it's unfortunate, but it would not have been possible if the people who live in these countries had buy-in or has consented to the need to move freely across these countries. Remember, for example, in our country, Ghana, people still call ECOWAS citizens foreigners. Exactly. Everyone who is not a Ghanaian is a foreigner. I think it's unfortunate. So we talk about the difficulty of moving across Ghana, but we're already calling them foreigners. So what is a foreigner coming to do in your country? And that is a conversation at a national level, at a local level. And in order for you to build the buy-in from your policymakers, they need to be sure that they have the support of the policy takers. Otherwise, they will be coming up and drafting policies that are not very in line with what their people think. So you have to go back to the drawing board. We have to go back to the grassroots. And we have to educate the people in case we are fully convinced that this is our interest. We have to explain to people that when you move around freer, you can trade freer. It creates economic opportunity for your people, and as well as it creates economic opportunity for other people who are coming. Because look, there are rules and regulations that bind you and others for the opening up of markets. So let's say, for example, you are moving as a Ghanaian trader to Benin, and you have your trade, and you are complaining about how difficult Benin is making its borders for your Ghanaian traders who are coming to sell. Meanwhile, when Beninois come to Ghana and they want to trade, you want to put them in the prison because they are coming to and they are encroaching on your business.
Exactly.
Is it right? It's an imbalanced view that needs a more thorough engagement in order to get the buy-in from the people. Do we want to close our borders or do we want to open our borders? You might say yes, I might say no, others might say yes, others might say no. But eventually, we need to have an educated critical mass of our population who supports the policy that accelerates the ratifications of the free movement protocol of the African Union. If we can't get that at the national level, we can never expect to move forward as a continent.
If we can't get that at the national level, we can't expect to move forward at the local level. Now, let me shift the conversation to the trade since it is interrelated.
Yes.
I've gotten the opportunity to have a sit at meetings and realize that people are of the view that the AfCFTA or the AfTA is basically or merely just a paperwork that is happening and it's not actually being manifested.
That's not true.
We are talking about Africa's economic trade. What is the AfTA doing in terms of payments, trade payments, to facilitate payments among businesses that are coming from different countries? Because we look at a whole lot of different currencies and you just have to change to dollar to be able to pay somebody in Benin.
And that's just too expensive.
Exactly. So what is the AfCFTA looking at from this angle?
So this is a very good question, and it's important to emphasize the fact that the AfCFTA will not be a magic wand that will immediately remove all barriers to the free movement of goods and people across the continent. The AfCFTA's core, let's call it core mandate, is to remove the tariffs for trade across Africa in order to help African producers and manufacturers to increase their market access and to improve their trade by accessing different markets. That is the core business. To get there, they will be assisted by other agreements that would provide a synergy effect into the AfCFTA. Like, for example, for intra-African payments, there is an initiative by that is pioneered by AfCFTA called the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, where different traders, manufacturers, and producers will be able to pay and receive money in their local currencies effortlessly. So if you're in Nigeria, I'm in Ghana, you are selling me a good and you are quoting me 100,000 naira, and I'm seeing it from my end as you are quoting me 1,000 cedi for this. And so I either accept or I do not accept 1,000. So I pay it 1,000 and you receive your 100,000, and we pay one financial transaction cost instead of shuffling, converting to a third-party currency and then converting it back to the local, to the chagrin of the traders, the buyers and the sellers, and to the benefit of internationally based banks who will actually siphon these financial transactions outside of the continent. So that is one, for example. The free movement protocol, which we were talking about, is also a synergetic agreement that would allow traders easier access to these markets, because where people move, trade moves.
When people move,
trade moves. And so if you're a trader, either in goods or in services, you have to move across countries. And the easier your movement is, the more economic activity will take place, because now you have access to these markets. And it goes against you sometimes. You have to understand that when you open someone else's market, you are also assumed to open your own market. I'm coming back to this point because it's important to understand that there are opportunities. But then, as well as you are competing with the Beninois in Benin, the Beninois also has the right to compete in your country. That is, let's call it a reciprocity.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And whether AfCFTA or FMP or any of the other agreements, none of these agreements will work perfectly if we continue to see with one eye, and we continue to fail to see that we have duties and obligations to open up our own markets in the same way as we are entitled to open up the markets of our African brothers and sisters and their various countries. So these are just two of the many agreements that can give support, real support, and would allow us to transform our economies. Now, cross-cutting all of this is a conversation about the informality of African trade. You know, we talk about the average intra-African trade recorded falling somewhere within 15%.
Yes.
The actual data does not capture all of the volumes of trade that goes across our borders.
Due to the informal.
Due to the informal nature. There are some researchers who have actually calculated that if the informal trade was taken or factored into the volumes of inter-African trade, the number can jump as high as 30%. So that is already an impressive number to start with. But now the trick is to formalize these informal sectors in order not because we want them to be formal, because informal is not illegal, but informal is scattered. And scattered means they have low economies of scale. So when you have lesser volumes to trade or to do business, you are allocating your costs along a smaller number, and so your costs are higher. So you are uncompetitive. Remember, we are now competing against more than 50 countries in Africa, right? So you have to up your competitiveness, and to up your competitiveness, you have to reduce your costs, you have to increase the volumes in which you trade with, and you have to become more professional at doing the business that you have. And there are ways to do that.
All right. So this is the last question. In terms of free trade, Africa Continental free trade, on the panel you explained as in free not being free. So I just want you to, in a snappy way, explain it to our audience that the free is not free as we think.
Absolutely.
Because people think free is just about moving your goods without paying the other.
It's like when Kwame Nkrumah said, Ghana is free forever.
Exactly.
Right? So not everything is free, because of course you have to pay for the services which you are buying. And when I said that free trade is not free, it means that the objective of the African Free Trade Agreement is to reduce the tariffs, which are the duties that you pay for moving your goods from one country to the other. But remember that the tariffs are not the only costs that you are expecting to pay when you are moving your goods. There are fees and charges. There are terminal handling charges, there are transportation costs, there are other costs that are involved. There's so many inspection charges, regulatory charges, if you have to register to some standards authorities or to some particular sanitary and photosanitary measures. All of this are not under the realm of the AfCFTA. You will still need to declare your goods, and if there are some licenses that you need to import to register for in conformity with the laws and the regulations of the country which you are accessing, then you have to do that, unless that country decides that they reduce both the cost of the fees and charges, or to standardize in such a way that now everybody is using the same registration and standards across the African countries. Now at least you can reduce your cost, because you don't need to have two standards, one from the country of origin and one from the country of destination. You know, and most of the times the fees and the charges are, and the other which are bundled as non-tariff barriers. So you have the tariff barriers and you have the non-tariff barriers, and the AfCFTA will principally handle the tariff barriers. The non-tariff barrier will be an aspect that would be dealt with through the ongoing negotiation between the parties of the AfCFTA to harmonize the trade procedures and the documentary procedures, the standards and the other requirements for international trade, so that once you arrive to a point where all of them are more or less agreeing on the modalities of international trade, your costs will come down. So these are part of the non-tariff barriers. And then you have the red tape, where you are not really telling people, I don't want to allow people to import because I have something similar and I want to protect. And these are the remedial measures which countries will have to work eventually with their own local authorities in order to build the efficiency and the competitiveness of their own local manufacturers and producers so that they can survive against the consequences of opening up your markets to foreign trade and African trade in goods and services. So we need to be prepared, basically.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. We
Thank
are
you for the
grateful
opportunity.
for having the time for us. We want to see you in another
Sure.
episode
Sure.
sometime.
We'll see.